This is called The Haunted Pavilion, Part 1. A long time ago, it was a norm for scholars wandering with sword and lute, as it was known then, to travel the countryside seeking knowledge from ancient sites and attaining wisdom from men of learning. It so happened one such scholar was trekking along a road south of Hanyang, en route to the city. He'd arrived late at a village some 12 miles short of Hanyang, and as night was closing in fast, he asked an old woman if there was an inn nearby. Her response was that the nearest inn was some miles distant. That would not do, the scholar hummed. Oh well, I may as well stay the night at that pavilion I've just passed. Such pavilions were common in China at that time, used as resting places for weary travelers, and looked after by neighboring villagers. But hearing this, old woman paled, and at once, barring his way, she cautioned, "You must not do that. The place is haunted by evil spirits and demons." No one who had stayed there had ever lived to tell the tale. The young scholar, however, dismissed her dire warnings with a wave of a hand, and smiling said that he was quite adept at taking care of himself. No amount of protestation from the gathered villagers would deter him, and he set off for the pavilion. When pitch darkness blanketed the earth, far from going to sleep, the scholar instead lit a small lamp and, retrieving his book, began reading the passages out loud. Time passed, and for a long while nothing stirred until, on the stroke of midnight, the scholar heard loud footsteps on the road outside. Peering out of the door, he saw a man dressed in black. The man stopped and called for the master of the pavilion. "Here I am," ejected a petulant voice from just behind the scholar, startling him so that he jumped in surprise. He turned, but there was no one there. "What do you want?" the huffy voice emerging from the air asked. "Who is in the pavilion?" the man in black demanded. "A scholar is in the pavilion, but he is reading his book and not yet asleep," the voice replied. At this, the man in black sighed and turned his steps towards the village. The scholar shook his head, and, with a slight grimace on his lips, he settled back on his makeshift bed and resumed his reading. Some while later, he was again interrupted by loud footsteps, and this time, as he peered out of the door, he saw a man in a red hat halting on the road outside the pavilion. "Master of the pavilion," the man bellowed. "Here I am," again the grumbling voice came from just behind the scholar. "Who is in the pavilion?" the man in the red hat with a fiery voice demanded. "A scholar is in the pavilion, but he is reading his book and not yet asleep," the voice responded. At this, the man in the red hat sighed too and turned towards the village. It looks like I'm not going to get any peace tonight," the scholar put aside his book and waited for a few minutes until he was sure there was no one else coming down the road. After a time, he crept out of the door and, standing on the road, called out, "Master of the pavilion!" "Here I am," came the same response from within. "Who is in the pavilion?" the scholar asked. "A scholar is in the pavilion, but he's reading his book and not yet asleep," the voice responded. The scholar sighed and then asked, "Who was the man in the black?" "That was the black swine of the north," the voice answered. "And who is the man in the red hat?" "That was the red cock of the west." "And who are you?" the scholar then demanded. "I am the old scorpion," was the reply. At this, the scholar quietly snickered, then slipped back into the pavilion. He did not sleep, however. Instead, he stayed awake the rest of the night, reading his book undisturbed. End of part 1.